Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to me making this cabinet here. I decided to make a part 4. So, it's probably not the funnest part, but it has to get done. And the other videos I thought were going to be too long. So, in this one, everything's pretty much done. Let me flip you around here. So, here it is so far. So, for those of you that saw, part 1 was making the box, part 2 was making the countertop. I just finished the doors. They didn't come out quite as nice as the last ones, but... So anyways, in this video, this is basically finishing. So it's a lot of sanding. It's pretty much sanding the whole thing down. I start with like 120 and work to 220. The doors probably I'll start with 80 because they need a little more like curving. So it's sanding. It's probably taking some wood filler and filling any gaps and painting. So like I said, probably not the funnest, but it's got to get done. And I figured you guys probably still need to see it because if you make one, that's what you'll have to do. So let me get started. So basically what the steps are, I'm sanding everything first. So I start with 80. I use 80 grit sandpaper to kind of like mold it. So if, wood's not fitting right, if there's pieces sticking up, I use 80 grit to shape it kind of the way that I want. Once it's pretty much shaped right, I use maybe some wood filler to fill in some gaps. Bigger gaps, I might use caulk. And then I start smoothing down the sandpaper. So then I go from 120 to kind of smooth out all the wood filler. And then I go down to 220. I think I have a 180 in between. I go down to 220 so that before I paint, it's nice and smooth. So here I'm just removing the hardware. Just I took the doors off. They're just easier to manage that way. And took the hard off. And I'm going to just start sanding with that 80 grit to kind of like smooth over any joints, any misshapes, to kind of get it look the way I want. So as you can see, you got to do a good amount of sanding. That 80 grit, even though it's pretty coarse, I really want to make sure everything is smooth. My joints are smoothed over. Everything transitions nicely. So it's a good amount of sanding. So now that I kind of have it shaped the way that I want, I'm going to just fill in any gaps I see with this wood filler. This stuff's pretty nice. It's a natural color, so the color's nice. And then it's sandable. You could paint it. It's actually stainable too if you wanted to stain it, but I'm just going to fill in any gaps that I see here. So now that I have the door shaped and the wood filler in, it needs like 2 hours to dry before you can sand it. I'm going to start working on the box, and I'm just going to start with the same process, shaping it all with 80 grit, making sure all the joints are smooth nicely, and then I'm going to add any wood filler to any gaps. So on this one, because I use finished nails on the face frame, I have to recess them a little bit so that the wood filler can cover them. So I'm just taking a little punch and pressing them down a little bit so I can go over them with wood filler. So here's just a close-up to show, not only how nicely the wood filler covers the finished nails, but also like here, any indentations or imperfections in the wood, the joint, that wood filler just kind of smooths it all over, fills it, and then when you sand it and paint it, you won't even see all these little nicks and dings in the wood. It'll look totally flush. So this wood filler does the trick good. So now that I've gone over the whole thing with the wood filler, I've filled in any nail holes, any gaps, any damages that I've seen. I'm going to let that dry for 2 hours, and then it's just back to sanding. I'm going to start smoothing it out now. So I'm going to move up in grit. I'm going to start with 120 and just go over the whole thing with the 120. Sand all the wood fillers, high spots that I've seen, and just start smoothing. Like if you can see this crack here, so that's how it looked before. And then once I add my wood filler and sand it, it looks like that. So that'll be the face. And once I paint it, it'll look even better. So now that I got the whole thing sanded, I figured it wasn't very fun to show it all, but you just got to take my word for it. I'd say it was probably about 2 hours of sanding, but I did the whole thing. I passed at 120 to 180 to 220.
So now that I have the whole thing smooth, what I'm going to do is caulk the inside, just in the cracks there where the walls meet the floor. That gap, if my cut's a little uneven or whatever, the caulk kind of fills it in nicely. I don't like the wood filler in the corner; it's just harder to apply. I feel like the caulk is just too easy, and I mean, you don't have to do this step, but I think it definitely makes it look sharper. So I just put a bead in each corner and just kind of take my finger to smear it, wipe off any excess, and then it's all paintable. So once it's dry, you can just paint over it and you won't even notice it, and it'll just kind of make those gaps in the corners be gone. So there's a caulk line, and I know it doesn't look too pretty right now, but once it's painted, it will all be covered and there won't be a gap there. So I think that's, I'm going to call that like that. That's sanded the way that it is. I'm going to let that caulk dry and then we can get to painting. So I'm going to start with the doors. I had a little bit of leftover spray primer from another job, so I just figured I'd use that up. But I definitely found it was easier to prime them first. I did try it both, just using paint and then primer. And the primer was nicer. For one, it's cheaper, so if you do a layer, it's less paint you have to use later. And then two, it's just a little bit thicker, so it helped fill in the gaps and it made it nicer. So I'm gonna prime everything first. So I used a cabinet and trim paint, semi-gloss. I think the color I used was, Swiss Coffee. It's called, yeah. It's like a white. It's like an off-white. It's like it had like a smoky color to it, but that was the one that I liked the best. But that cabinet paint is nice and thick. It lays on good, and then the semi-gloss is nice too for cabinetry. And then painting is nothing special. I use a brush to edge in the corners and a roller wherever I can, wherever it's flat, and just go through the motions. So then what I ended up doing is one coat of primer, and then I ended up doing two coats of the paint. And then what I also did that I feel made a big difference is in between each coat is just doing a very light sanding. That's 400 grit sandpaper. That really just helped get any little small bumps out, any little wood fibers that kind of stuck up. But I noticed that by doing that light sanding in between each coat, the finished product came out a lot smoother. And there it is, all finished, sanded, painted, the whole kit and caboodle. So, I know it's not totally perfect, but I'm happy with it. I still need to, so then I just kind of threw in a shelf in there, and I want to get some banding here, but that's for another time. Put these little soft close buttons on it so they don't slam so much. But there she is. I'm actually in the process of making all this stuff for this whole back room, but we'll save that for another time. But anyways, hope that was pretty cool of you to watch, and I don't know if it was interesting. I know the end is not the funnest, but you kind of got to do it. And then obviously once you're done with that, it makes the whole thing really, really pop. So thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys later.